Hey, true believers. Chris Matt coming at you today with WildCats #1. This was the comic book that Jim Lee created after all the X writers left Marvel in the 90s and started Image Comics. That's why it was called the Exodus, because it was like Jim Lee, Todd McFarlane, Rob Liefeld, Mark Silvestri, Eric Larson, and all those big talent left to create their own comic company. So this was like the bee's knees back in the day, because with Image, all the creators, like all the IPs that were made, continue to be owned by the creators. So like Spawn is still owned by Todd McFarlane, as were, even though Bill Finger and Bob Kane, for example, created Batman, Batman is now owned by DC. So that was the big drive of Image. And I remember when these books were coming out when I was a kid, and I didn't read a whole lot of them. I kind of flipped through them, and I didn't know how to feel about them. But with this book, I was watching on the Tubi streaming app. If you guys have not checked out Tubi, it's free. They got some really great stuff on there. They have the old G.I. Joes, the old Transformers, but they also have the WildCats cartoon. And I don't remember there being a cartoon. I remember the action figures. But anyway, I started watching it, and it reminded me why I love WildCats. So I had to dig out my #1 and do a review on it for that reason alone, because yeah, there's some stark contrast to the cartoon, but obviously you have to do that because this was a pretty violent book. But anyway, the creative team: Jim Lee, co-creator and writer and penciler; Brandon Choi, co-creator and writer; Scott Williams, inker; Mike Hessler, letters; Joe Rosas doing the colors; Ruth Grease was the editor; and Digital Chameleon doing the color separations. And then in Jim Lee's imprint, each of them had their own kind of like imprint. Jim Lee's at this point, I think it was Malibu, and then I think it went over to Wildstorm. Let me remember, I forget how that works. But anyway, this book came out in August 1992. And we start off, it says the past, which is like 1980, so this is right around the Cold War era. And these two scientists are just looking at this whole crater in Antarctica. And this particular fellow thinks it's something completely different, but this other man's like, it's a Rusky satellite, whatever. But you come to find out of all that, here comes a character named Void. And she's saying, give me the orb. You do not comprehend its powers. So that's kind of a foreshadowing of what's going to be happening. And then even before we even get into the comic book, we're introduced to the past. Then we're hit with this thing called the future, which says August 9th, 1992. So we are in the future in 1992 here, folks. And again, we are shown Void. And we're introduced to, well, not introduced yet, but we're talking about a name named Jacob. So remember that. That's going to be kind of important. And before any more of that can happen, we then jump to the present, which is 1990. And this is Jacob Marlowe, who they're referring to here. I didn't want to give away what they're talking about here because it's kind of a spoiler alert. But yeah, you see this, he's obviously a hobo. And what's this called? Resurrection Day is what this thing's called right there. I had a hard time reading that in the gutter, but yeah, Resurrection Day. And the way Jim Lee here and Choi talk about is Jacob Marlowe, said he couldn't catch a break through the 60s, 70s, 80s. Each generation kicked him, and he said his future is not looking bright. And to just kind of enforce that, you see that he's a hobo living in trash. These guys come to roll him, but he says, get away from me. And all of a sudden there's a power zap. As I give you a nice blurry image there. A power zap as he says, get away from me. So you're just like, wait a minute, what's going on? So right off the bat here, I like how Lee and Choi, with those 2 pages, doing the past, the present, the future, it builds up the tension. You're like, well, what's going on? What's this silver lady? Which you do find out her name is Void, so let's just, for the sake of the review. And then finally we're introduced to our character. We get some backstory. And you're just kind of wondering, what's the importance? And then again here, the hobo, these guys that are rolling him want to kill Marlowe. And then we see this hand, which we've seen this power signature just a few pages ago. So it goes, by killing him, you jeopardize the survival of mankind. And so this is where this Void introduces herself to Jacob Marlowe. And she goes, You are the King Imp, the champion of mankind. The Cabal has once more ascended to power on this world and threatens humanity. So she's saying we must be ready for the oncoming war. So with that said, we're still kind of in the present, but check this out. The beginning present, or the future, said August 9th. Well, here it says today, August 8th, 1992. So we see that Marlowe, even though he's got some nicer looking threads to a degree, still kind of the same guy. Except here where, you see him coming out of the alleyway, and he actually gets hit by a car. How would that not break some bones? But anyway, I guess it's because he's not, as we saw, he has a power signature, so probably not feel it nonetheless. And then this doorman says, "Top of the morning to you, Mr. Marlowe." Just hold the door. So you can see something's kind of changed, because he's kind of like a, Big Daddy Hugh Hefner here, and it's all because of Void helping him to realize his future. And he's like, "I don't know if I believe all of this yet." He's like, "If it wasn't for you, I'd end up in a potter's field." But she's saying, "Be careful, Marlowe, because my dreams are becoming more and more lucid." And so she's talking about how she sees this orb, and someone attacks her with it, and she goes, "It hits me so hard, essentially, that I can't even survive it." And she goes, "I see all of these different timelines forming and whatnot, and there's a crucial nexus point." And she's talking about how we have to keep Marlowe alive so we can survive this oncoming Cabal. And then this is where we're introduced to the beginning team of the WildCats. And so this is Spartan, which Spartan to me kind of reminds me of like a mixture of Cyclops and Captain America in terms of his mannerisms and his sternness. And then this is Merv, which I don't remember what the acronym, or if it's just called Merv, M-I-R-V. So yeah. And then he's saying Warblade and Maul's his name, are training in the CTR, Combat Training Room. And Marlowe calls all these people the Gifted. So you can see how they were very much coming off the X-Men. So the Merv is basically the Blackbird. The CTR, the Combat Training Room's Danger Room. And then the Gifted ones, mutants. So you can kind of see where they get their inspiration. But I like how you can kind of tell the inspiration, but it doesn't feel like ripped off. It feels original, and I appreciate that. So Maul has the ability to grow, but the bigger he gets, the less his intelligence doesn't keep up with him. So as he gets stronger, he kind of becomes like the Hulk and kind of becomes mindless. Warblade's sort of like this cybernetic metal character. So in a sense, he reminds me of Wolverine, but not really. So this is the beginning team of the WildCats. And then we're introduced to Hellspawn, who is the leader of the Cabal, who are the Daemonites, which they're kind of like an old race. It sort of reminds me of like the villain. It could be like the villains for the Inhumans in a sense, because they talk about this whole epic past that they had and how they're trying to move in and take over the world. So in a sense, it could also be like the Skrulls. But anyway, he's talking about we have all these things lined up for reunification, but yet one of you is betraying me. And so these are all the Daemonites here. And then this character here, Pike. Now, tell me, does Pike not look like what's it called? Deadpool. But anyway, I wanted to show, like I said, this comic book's a little more violent. So you come to find out that this character here, this Daemonite, is the betrayer. And Pike just and sticks his face and kills him in the spaghetti, saying, the condemned man does deserve his last meal. So you're just like, dang. But yeah, you can very much see the inspiration of Liefeld's Deadpool in that. Even though this is Jim Lee, they all work together, so you know that they all were inspired from one another. And I really like the design they used for both Pike. Even though he looks Deadpoolish, the design's really nice. But I love this look for Hellspawn, where he doesn't really have a face. It's just like this glowing energy. Really good stuff. And now he has kind of like an oracle. She sort of reminds me of like an evil Jean Grey, or in this sense, I guess you could say Emma Frost. And they're looking for the next Gifted. And so she's trying to tell him where it's at. It's like they cannot fall into the hands of the cherubim, I think is how I pronounce it, which are the WildCats, because that's kind of what their race is. And with that said, before we go any further, I miss this in comic books, where you crack, especially like Image or Independence, where you'd actually get trading cards inside the book, and then you would open them up and they give you information. Like when I was a kid and I used to draw my own comic books, I used to make my own trading cards because I was inspired from books like this, which really helped with the creativity. So I miss this. This is a little trope that I definitely miss from the 90s. And so anyway, you're introduced to another like deadly assassins. They're called the Coda. And if you want to know more about that, read the book. But you notice that this place called the Spot, we're introduced to this character named Cole. And he's saying that the Spot used to be like a hot place for all like GIs to come back during the Cold War, because I think it was around '89 is when the Berlin Wall fell. But anyway, so this is where they go to look for this new gifted one. And what I like is he enters, he says, "No more cold warriors, just hot dancers." And then this is where we're introduced to a character named Voodoo, which we were just looking at her trading card. Now hold on, folks, because these books, this is one thing about 90s comics that kind of drive me nuts, is I like how they would do this vertical splash page, stay mouse. But when you get the trading card in there and the pages just do not behave themselves. But still, you get, look at all this page space that you get. So that's one thing I miss about these. So anyway, the introduction, as I was saying, the introduction of Voodoo here, she reminds me, like the way that they present her, because she's a dancer, obviously, it reminds me of Nancy from Sin City, which the story for that one was called That Yellow Bastard. So if you guys haven't read the comics, you can go back and watch the movie, and that's the one with Bruce Willis and Jessica Alba. But yeah, that scene in particular reminds me of that. And as I was saying, this, how Void was saying that there's a crossing point in the nexus of the timelines. This kind of reminds me of like a visual representation, because we have this character named Cole, and he's talking about Sister Zealot and how they're here to look for this gifted girl. The Cabal are looking for her. The Coda are looking for her. The Cherubim, which are the Wildcat characters, are looking for her. So it's kind of like, whew, you kind of start to see everything start to come to a boiling point. You know what I mean? But see what I mean? This is, again, I hate that you have to spin it, flip it. It's like playing with the damn Rubik's Cube. Now, Voodoo, her power is, or at least the primary point of her power is she can see the Cabal for who they truly are. So she's looking at this character who's trying to grab her, and she screams. You see, "So, you see us as we truly are, then you are indeed dangerous to the Cabal." Which here they look absolutely terrifying. As we're in the cartoon, they're just like little green men. So yeah. Now, Cole. And for those of you that aren't big fans of this character, Cole is the Grifter. So here's the first appearance of the Grifter with his mask. Now what I like is, in hindsight, when we're looking at this now, we're like, yeah, Grifter! But back in the day, no one knew who this was, and I like how Choi and Lee made this very sort of like anticlimactic, because this girl goes, "Hey, you're Shaft, aren't you? Do something." Ah, my adoring public. Now, when I first read this, because I didn't read all the Image imprints when they came out, but Shaft, I was like, wait a minute, this isn't the movie. And I was like, Shaft. No, this Shaft was like the Archer for Rob Liefeld's Youngbloods. So I like how each book kind of crosses over. Like in the beginning, when Marlowe is a hobo, he's talking about how he saw something in the night and he thought it was just like he was tripping. And the editor's note says, "See Cyberforce." Cyberforce was Mark Silvestri's imprint for Image. So that was really cool. And then it's just action, just sweet, beautiful 90s cheese action with all the stuff that you would want from a book. And here, here's the first real team throwdown of the WildCats. And I just love that. Just great artwork all around by the team. And then, it's where Grifter teams up with the team. Teams up with the team. Wow, I like to repetitively repeat myself. But anyway, Grifter's always talking about Sister Zealot and how she trained him. Well, with that said, we see this silhouette, and again, look at this, just wow, that's intense. The last page I want to show you is another lovely 90s artwork here. This is the last member of us Cyberforce WildCats. This is Sister Zealot. And if you guys go back on Tubi, which again, free app, very awesome. I'm not promoting for them, I appreciate, because yeah, you get a couple of ads in between the shows, but it's free. And you get Transformers and G.I. Joes and WildCats. And I just love how Lee drew her here. And the way she talks and, you know, kind of like her discipline, you come to find out something about her. I don't want to give it away. But she reminds me of Storm and Wonder Woman in terms of like how she carries herself. And the same thing with Voodoo. On the prior page, she goes, well, someone please tell me what's going on, and she's kind of freaking out. It reminds me of Jubilee. So again, you go back to kind of see Jim Lee's influence from the X-Men books. But yeah, guys, this was a great read. I actually am probably later today going to go online and see if I can find issues 2 and 3, because I think this went on to do, what was it, 50 or 60 issues, but this is part 1 of 3, so I think Lee was just kind of testing the waters on see how people would love it. And I think this is a great book. So with that said, if you guys have enjoyed this comic book, please make sure to support your local comic shop and pick up a copy. Either check the dollar bins or just see if it's in the back issues. If not, then, you know, check out the unconventional routes, but always make sure to support your local comics first. And if you guys have enjoyed this review, we definitely appreciate it if you take a moment to hit like, share, and subscribe. Helps the club channel more than you could possibly know. And if you won't mind hitting that fancy little WildCats bell next to subscribe, that way as we continue to upload content, you guys will get notified. Come to the page, and love to have a dialogue with you all down in the comments below or on our social media pages, which I'll make sure to leave the links down in the description below. So with all that said, thank you all so much for stopping by. Hope you all continue to have a great day reading, and happy hunting, true believers.